Hi everyone, welcome to Active Self-Protection Extra. Today, a discussion of another news story involving self-defense, use of force firearms that I found in my just daily perusal of the news. This one about 3D printed guns that I think we should maybe talk about a little bit because it's pretty interesting. MagTech is the only freedom seed I use on the range. I personally have over 100,000 rounds downrange of MagTech, and it's unbelievably reliable, very accurate, and a great value. Pick some up for your next range trip wherever you shop for range supplies. Obviously, this one's in the news right now because of the murder of the United Health CEO. And some people have asked me to analyze that video. I'm not going to do that. Because it's an assassination, and I generally don't do assassinations at all. And I don't think that ASP can add anything to that discussion of any significance. So we're not going to. Simple as that. Now, there is in this article some discussion of that, but of course 3D printed firearms are in the news because of it, because the murderer used a 3D printed firearm. And I know that's going to cause some heartburn because some people are going to say, why are you calling him a murderer? I think that our system is pretty well designed that unless somebody uses deadly force to stop an active deadly threat to them or someone else, immediate deadly threat, not a potential deadly threat, but an immediate one, and they do so with malice aforethought, we would call that premeditated murder. So, I mean, that to me is pretty straightforward on that. We can talk about all the other stuff, and maybe we would. Do you want to have me talk about that? Would you like to see a video on that? I'll talk about it if you want, but I don't know that everybody's going to want to hear what I have to say. Let's focus on the 3D printed guns. A couple of interesting things in this particular one. Of course, the person writing the story wants to kind of, sensationalize things and talk about ghost guns. And let's talk just really briefly about ghost guns and why they're calling them that. Because they weren't produced by a firearms manufacturer, okay? And so they don't need to have a serial number on them. Now, interestingly, in the story, they talk about the fact that in many parts of Europe, they are specifically prohibited 3D printed firearms. In some countries in Europe, it's illegal to even own the plans or to have a copy of the plans for a 3D printed firearm, let alone to make any components. Because, of course, nanny state get a nanny, right? However, in the US, you can make your own firearm. It's not illegal at all to make your own firearm, and it doesn't need a serial number on it as long as you don't intend to transfer it to somebody else. That's broadly legal, at least on a federal level. Now, states have different things, and your state may have its own regulations on that. So check with your local firearms attorney on what your state requires. But as a general, like I live in Arizona, and you could go to Home Depot right now and buy, some lead pipe and make a shotgun out of it if you want to. And we've done that, and we've had fun with it. In fact, make a little slam fire shotgun, and they're kind of fun, actually. I don't do it a lot, but you can do that. So it's legal to do here. It wasn't 3D printed. It was made out of stuff you buy at the hardware store. Okay. The last time we did that because before they changed the law in Arizona, a local police department was offering it was, I think, $50 gift certificates, gift cards, Visa gift cards for turning in unwanted firearms. And so I went down and made 10. I made 10 of these shotguns for I think it cost me $30 in parts and got $500 worth of gift cards for it. It was kind of cool. And then they changed the laws in Arizona and they don't do those kinds of buybacks here anymore, and they know what we do with those. So anyway, interesting stuff in the story. Let's talk about the story. And this story was in the conversation. They Creative Commons licensed their stuff. There's a link to it in the description. So go ahead and check it out if you want. Interestingly, a couple interesting things. First of all, they said that the first case of a criminal charge involving a 3D printed firearm was in 2013 in the UK. That surprised me. A couple of other things that I see there, US police, as you can see here, I'll put up the statistic from 2017, like 1,600 cases all the way up now to almost 20,000 in 2021. So you can see the rise there as 3D printers become cheaper and more accessible and plans are more accessible. Okay, fine. You're going to see a whole bunch more of that. And so they say 8,500 in 2020 and then 19,200 in 2021. So that's a huge increase, and that's just the way things are going to go. Another interesting thing, North America leads in 3D printed gun-related arrests with 166 cases of gun-related arrests with 3D printed guns from June of 2013 to June of 2023. So that's 160 arrests in 10 years. It's not a whole lot. However, Europe followed with 48. Okay, so some Europeans in there in unrest, while Oceania ranked third with 24. Oceania there being kind of Australia and New Zealand, right? Tanzania, no, not Tanzania. I don't know, Tasmania too in there, I'm not sure. Yeah, 36% of global arrests related to 3D printed firearms in 2023 being United States. But Canada's close behind with 34%. UK had 10%. Australia had 8%. So it's not a US phenomenon on its own. Simple as that. Interesting stuff, though. They do show that these guns have been used by diverse groups, including far-right extremists, ethno-separatists, jihadists, left-wing anarchists, organized crime groups in Europe, and pro-democracy rebels in Myanmar. Wow. Now you might expect that. Okay, we can't get a hold of firearms, so we'll make our own. And people are ingenious, right? And of course, in Europe and in Australia, you're going to have a lot of freak out about that. But the story gets interesting when we talk about the legal requirements here. You know, Canada bans this stuff. They hate that stuff. 3D printed firearms in Australia are illegal. In the European Union, making or owning homemade firearms, including 3D printed ones, is broadly prohibited, but laws and penalties vary in the European Union, is what they say. So, okay, here's the interesting stuff, though. Read a little further, U.S. laws. The U.S. Constitution, I'm just going to quote this. The U.S. Constitution poses some unique challenges to regulating ghost guns, especially for the federal government, but also for the states. For regular firearms, that is, those not produced by 3D printing, U.S. federal law requires that a key component, called the lower receiver, bear a unique serial number. Wait on that a minute. Purchasing a lower receiver requires a federal background check. Not always, but all right, I'll go with it. And conducting the transaction through a merchant who holds a federal firearms license. Not always, but from the manufacturer. Okay, we'll go with that. Now here's where it gets interesting. The situation is more complicated when it comes to 3D printed weapons. The First Amendment to the Constitution protects freedom of expression. It sure does. I do like that the author didn't say that it grants the right of self-expression. Okay, it does not. The First Amendment protects freedom of expression, which includes sharing digital files that could contain firearm designs. And the Second Amendment protects citizens' right to bear arms. Keep and bear arms, okay? In the US, selling 3D printed firearms requires a federal license. If that's your business, yes, it requires a license to sell a firearm. You can sell a firearm in many states from one private citizen to another without a federal firearms license, and that's fine. I've sold firearms here in Arizona, bought firearms from other private citizens here in Arizona. Don't need to get the government involved in it in any way. You can't sell it to a prohibited possessor, but every time I bought one, I go, here you can see my CCW. My CCW says I have had a background check and I'm not a felon, and I'm not a prohibited possessor, so I can buy your gun. And when I sell, the times that I've sold, can I just see? I don't need a copy of it, but I just want to see that you have a CCW. Yep, I sure do. Great. Have a nice day. Or I've also sold them to people that are personally known to me. So he says, interesting, owning or producing homemade firearms for personal use is allowed. And it's almost like the pearls are getting clutched here. That includes 3D printing the lower receiver component and assembling the rest of the weapon with unregulated parts. Yes, it's not just 3D printed weapons. If you have a smithy, if you have a forge, you can print your own steel firearm. There's nothing saying that you can only do it with a 3D printer. You can make your own firearms. That is, again, a protected enumerated right. Now, the interesting stuff here, current federal law that the Supreme Court's looking at requires 3D printed guns to meet specific guidelines, even if they do not contain any currently regulated firearm components. So if you're going to sell kits about making 3D printed firearms, you must obtain a federal license and conduct background checks and do all that stuff. Now, here's the other part, is they make this big thing, well, but again, if it's going to be an automatic weapon, then there's a whole nother list of rules. Guys, that's under the National Firearms Act. So if you print a fully automatic firearm, well, once it's a fully automatic firearm, now that has to be registered under the National Firearms Act, and actually under the Hughes Amendment, you cannot register a new fully automatic firearm. Of course, where the biggest problem with that is 3D printed giggle switches. And they talk about those in here. 3D printers, using 3D printers to produce the switch, the auto-sear on the back of a Glock that you replace the cover plate on the back of the slide of the Glock with a little plate that you can flip a switch and it turns it into an auto-sear and makes a Glock fully automatic. I'll tell you that, again, I know a lot of cops in Phoenix, and they are finding gangbangers with giggle switches on Glocks, with auto-sears on Glocks all the time now. And most of those not even real Glocks. Most of those are not home printed here. That's too much of a pain in the butt for most of your gangbangers here. But they'll buy the cheap clones, cheap Gen 3 Glock 19 clones, and put an auto-sear on them. No big deal. Now, of course, once you do that, if the feds want to get involved with it, that's a 10-year sentence and a $250,000 fine. I mean, they're going to put you in prison for a long time for having that. And I've even seen idiots ordering them on Temu, which is stupid, because that's going to get delivered to your house, and it just takes one Fed boy going, oh, hey, look at what he ordered from China, and now you're in big trouble. The states are a little different, okay? So 15 states have regulations particularly related to 3D printed firearms. And now a New Jersey law of 2019 mandates that all 3D printed firearms have a serial number and be registered. And under current New York law, possession or distribution of a 3D printed gun is classified as a misdemeanor, but they're trying to raise that up to a felony. But I don't think that's going to pass constitutional muster. And certainly if anybody got charged with that, I would encourage them to push that as far up the appeals process as it possibly could. So what is all this to say? I think that the world, we see this 3D printed firearm get used in a pretty heinous event, and then that brings it into the foreground. And I want us to recognize that the right to keep and bear arms includes the right to assemble those firearms, includes the right to have them without the government's knowledge of them. And that's part of the Fourth Amendment. So when you start putting all those together, our courts have said pretty clearly, and our Constitution was written such that the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And I think we're seeing more and more of that. Under the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association v. Bruin standard, I don't see any state municipality coming up with a law that's going to pass that under the text, history, and tradition standard of Bruin. So if you go look that up, what that means is that the standard now that the Supreme Court has set for the whole land when you're looking at firearms regulations is, does the text specifically say that? Is there a history at the time of ratification of the Second Amendment? So the 1780s, not the 2024, 2025 and beyond, not the 20th century, the 21st century, none of that stuff. 1780s, is there a history of, in the US, of regulation of firearms like that here, and a tradition of that? So that's text, history, and tradition. Those are the tests that they can use, not an interest balancing test that they used to use. So that was asinine on enumerated rights. And so was there, you think back, let's think back to the colonies, right? And we were just a brand new nation. And let's remember the battles of Lexington and Concord were not fought over shoulder-fired weapons. What were the guns they were protecting there? Cannons. They were cannons, y'all, not shoulder-fired weapons. It wasn't a bunch of rifles sitting in a corner and Kentucky long rifles. It was cannons. Go look up your history. And recognize, would the federal government, when they said, hey, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, would they have said, except for they can't make them themselves, they have to go buy them from somebody else with a background check? No, and at the ratification of the Second Amendment, that's just asinine. People manufacturing their own firearms or manufacturing them locally without government control is just the way it is. In fact, I have a gun that I'm going to show here on the channel. Either I have already, I just filmed it, so when it posts will be interesting. But that was manufactured, it's in my safe right now, was manufactured in 1959, didn't have a serial number on it when it was manufactured, because until the Gun Control Act of 1968, it wasn't required. And so it has a scrawled number on it that somebody scratched into the barrel in an unobtrusive place sometime after 1968 and before I bought it. So that's much, much, much later. And so 3D printed firearms, I think, are in the news right now, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on them. I personally, yes, we do see, plenty of felons using them, but they get their guns in all kinds of places, right? They get guns from unlocked cars. They get them on the black market. They have their stupid buddy go buy them. And, gosh, the ATF sends them to the cartels like mad. So, let's not throw rocks too much at those folks buying guns and giving them to their stupid, brother-in-law. I don't think that's a good idea. I don't think they should do that, but you get my point, right? Should people be allowed to own the plans to 3D print firearms? Yes, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Should people be able to print their own firearms? Yes. Again, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And I think that's all people, whether I agree with you politically or not, whether I like you or not, I believe you have the right to self-defense, the right to keep and bear arms. Now, if somebody's a felon and they're in possession of a firearm, well, then that's a bigger issue, and they're already doing something illegal. We don't need new laws for that. If somebody misuses a firearm, well, there's already laws against that. We don't need new laws that are special because he printed the gun himself rather than went and bought it at the store or went and bought it from a private party. So like a lot of stuff, I think this is kind of, in the words of Macbeth, a tempest in a teacup full of sound and fury signifying nothing. But maybe you agree or disagree. Just do me a favor on this. Let's keep the discussion civil. The news story is linked in the description. You can read all about it there and let me know what you think about it. Download the ASP Unlimited app for all the content you love from active self-protection and more with no interference from YouTube. No ads, no age gates, exclusive videos, seminars, classes, and more on iOS, Android, Apple TV, Roku, Amazon Fire, and Android TV. Hit the link in the description or download ASP Unlimited from your app store today.